If you've opened Adobe Illustrator and not been sure where to begin, then fear not. My name's Matt, I'm a graphic designer with 20 years of experience, here to guide you through this crash course. In this video I'll be covering everything a beginner needs to know, from understanding the interface and the purpose of Illustrator to the essential tools you need to master. In just a few minutes we'll be ready to start making something together, so download the exercise files now so you can follow along and let's get started. Adobe Illustrator is primarily used for creating illustrations, logos in graphic design, print, things like packaging, and also creating graphics for the web and even video. It's used widely in the fields of graphic and web design, also in fashion and different industries like that. Anything that needs to use these kind of illustrated graphics, really. And one of the primarily reasons to use it is that it is a vector graphics program, and what that means is that the shapes and the paths that are created by mathematical equations as opposed to individual pixels. Let me just illustrate that. We've got two circles here. They both appear alike in dignity, but if we actually zoom in, we can see that the black circle is comprised of individual pixels here. So each square has a different color value, and all those together is what makes up the image. Whereas if however much we zoom into this purple circle, we still see a smooth line, and that's because this is created by mathematics, where each point, you see it says anchor point, between these points the path of that line is generated by a mathematical equation. So no matter how large we scale that image, it will always have the same quality, and that's why Illustrator is a great choice, or vector graphics in general, not just Illustrator, for creating things like logos that are always going to need to be resized. And it also keeps the quality when something's printed and things don't come out with that pixelated kind of look where you can see the individual pixels and it degrades the quality. So let's jump in to a demo where we can follow along. So we want to get our screens looking the same. So when you fire up Illustrator, it probably won't look like this. You'll probably have like a splash screen, a welcome screen, and we want to create a new file. So we're going to go to File, New. Now that's just the same as in lots of software. We have a menu bar along the top under File. You can do New, Open, Close, Save, Print, all the kind of things you could do if you were in Word, for example. Now you might not have that might be grayed out, and if it is, there's probably going to be a big blue New button on the side here of the splash screen, a bit like this Create button that's in the bottom right here. So if there's Create or New, click on that, and we have all these options along the top. Do you want to create a print file, something for film and video, something for the web? Well, let's do web so we can work together on screen in pixels and in RGB color. So any of these are fine, but let's select this 1920 by 1080, color mode RGB, and screen 72 dpi, and then click Create, and we'll have a new file. Then you want to go File, Save, and save this somewhere on your computer so you can work through. Okay, so let's have a look around and get some familiarity. When you first go into these design software, if you've used something like Photoshop, you might be familiar with this. You can skip to the next chapter, but if you're used to using things like PowerPoint and just word processing software, web browsers, spreadsheets, it can look a bit unfamiliar, but it's nothing to be scared of. It's just getting that familiarity with it. So along the top here we have all the files we're working with, our file names. We can just click on each of these tabs to go to the individual file, and it tells us how zoomed in we are. We're at 50% here. Then on the left we have the toolbar. Now yours, you might not have that there, so if your screen doesn't look the same as mine, what we need to do is we need to go to Window, Workspace, and Illustrator set up all these different layouts for us. So for example, if I change this to typography, it's going to move these panels around. We don't want that. We want to go to Window, Workspace, Essentials, and if yours doesn't look the same, maybe if you've got something over here like this, just go to Window, Workspace, and then Reset Essentials, and it will bring it back. So your screen should look pretty much like mine right now. Okay, so on the left we've got the toolbar, and this is a mini version of it. If we click on the dots at the bottom, we can see all the tools here, either in a list or in this grid. I'm going to click on the dots again to just hide this. And you can change how this looks, but it will start off with something like this. And if you just hover over each one of these, it will tell you what it does and even give you a little animation, a little demo of it. The selection tool, the direct selection tool, the pen tool, the curvature tool. Well, we're going to go through these in a minute. So your toolbar should be on the left, and then you'll have these panels on the right. And these are really helpful. I want you to pay attention to this one, the properties panel, because this changes depending on the tool we're on. So for example, if we change to the shape tool, you see we have different options here, transform and appearance. If we go back to the selection tool, the options have changed again, and that can be a really helpful thing for you to keep an eye and make quick changes as you move through. And just think about these tools like any tools. Let's say you're a visual artist, you might reach for a paintbrush. You might want to make that paintbrush, have a thicker paintbrush or a thinner paintbrush. You might want to reach for a scalpel. You might want to reach for charcoal or pencils, different types of paint, a different color from your palette. So just the same, you can reach for these tools here and they will help you create the graphics within your design. Okay, so that's the basic interface. If there's something you can't see that you want to see, if you go to window, most of the windows are here. So say you want to create a gradient, there is a window here that gives you the options that are within the gradient tool. Now this often comes up in the properties panel, but you can leave these open yourself if you like to. Okay, so we've created a new file. We've had a quick look around the interface. Here in the middle here is our artboard. So this black outlined on this rectangle is our artboard, and this is where we would create our design. Now in Illustrator you can create outside the bounds of that. If I just go to the pencil tool, which just draws like a pencil, just draws lines, so I can just do a squiggle like this. I can do it on my artboard, but I can draw up here. So this is something that you can't do like in a word processing software, in a presentation software. You can move things off and move things on, so it's kind of like that. But this area here is what you would export and what you would see, what is within the artboard. And you can create lots of these artboards within your workspace. So let's jump into some tools and start seeing something and start making something. So we're going to start with the type tool. The shortcut for that is T. So you can just press T once on your keyboard, but you can always go over here to your toolbar and just click on a tool and it will be there for you. So with the type tool, if we click once, you see it's already pasted in some placeholder text there, 2 words, and then the properties panel has changed to that of the type tool. So let's just make this larger. You can see here we've got the point size option, so just click on this drop down. Again, this is just like any other software you'll be familiar with. Let's maybe write something a little bit more meaningful, and we have the options here. Now you might have noticed there I just went and clicked on the selection tool again, and that's just like a habit. That is like your home base. If you're in the middle of a tool and you're not sure what's going on, just go back to that. You can either use the shortcut V or just click on that. Now the reason I didn't press V is because I was in the type tool. If I press V, it would have just entered a V type. So I've gone over and clicked on that. So let's use a font that we can all have access to. So Source Sans is a variable, is a Google font. So we can use that. And then here you can change the weight or the emphasis. So this is very, very familiar to anybody who uses any sort of computer software before, which I presume you've used some sort of software if you're here learning Illustrator. And let's say we want to zoom in a little bit. Now what we can do is press Command, hold down Command, and then press the plus key. We'll zoom in. You can see that it's gone to 66%. Press again, 100%. Obviously Command minus, zoom out, Command plus, zoom in. You can also, you see this magnifying glass is the zoom tool. You can click on that or press the shortcut Z and then click and hold. If you drag to the left, it will zoom out. If you drag to the right, it will zoom in, and you will get used to this sort of technique. Now if you want to then move around, if you on this tool or if you're on back to your selection tool, if you hold down the spacebar key, the cursor will change to a hand. If you click and hold your mouse button down and then move your mouse around and drag, this is the move tool, which allows you to just move around there. So let's zoom out again. And we have really powerful type tools that are quicker and easier to handle and manipulate type than it would be in basic software, like if you're making a spreadsheet or something. So if we put a carriage return in here and we see these two lines, we can adjust here the leading, which you might know as line height in your word processing software. So if we increase this to something huge like 300, we're going to have a huge space between the lines. Let's make that 72, which is 100%, the same as the point size. And you can adjust the kerning, the space between the individual letters, and the tracking, the space between all of the letters, like this kind of thing. But I'm going to put that back to 0. So back to our type tool with T, we clicked and then we were able to write on one line. But what I want to do is, if we have the type tool selected again, if you click and drag, you see it creates a rectangle, and this will give you some area type. It will fill this whole rectangle with type. So if we wanted to make this body copy, like our paragraphs under this headline, we'd want that to be much smaller. So let's say maybe it's 18 point. We'll change the leading to 21 point. And I'm just going to select here, we want to actually fill this whole thing with text. So if you go to type in the top menu and then click fill with placeholder text, actually just we've got Lorem Ipsum twice, so we'll just delete it like that. And you might want to, throw in some carriage returns for paragraph spacings. It's not the proper way to do it, but that'll do for now. And you can quickly see how you can create something. And with this selection tool, where you can just click on something and then click and hold your mouse button down and drag it around, it's very easy to manipulate things compared to if you've ever tried to make a poster on word processing software. It's nasty. So this is a lot easier. And we have other options for aligning things. So if I select both of these things, and there's a few ways to do it, I can click once on this and then hold down shift, hover over here, I've got these blue lines under, and click here. Now both are selected. If I want to deselect, I just click in some free space over here once and they're now deselected. Another way is if I click, hold the mouse button down and just drag over the both of them, they're both selected. Now different options always come up in this properties panel, so pay attention to it, and the align menus come up. And if you can't see that, you can just go to window, align, and it will pop up. And I can align these objects to the right, to the top maybe. I'm just going to undo that, which is Command Z or Control Z, just as it is in most programs. But I'm going to align these to the left, and I'll just close that because I can already have it over there. And you can already see here how kind of a layout could appear. Maybe we have an image next to it. I'm just going to use the shape tool for that, the rectangle tool, shortcuts M. I've just clicked on it there. So I'll just do it roughly. I'm getting some smart guides here. If you're not seeing this kind of thing when you hover over, you can turn that on in view and then smart guides or Command U. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle, and you can imagine this being, I'll select it all, drag it around. This can be like part of a layout. With the type tool, if we want to do an area, as well as clicking and dragging, we can also use one of these shapes. So let's say this was another column of text. I just hover over the edge, it says path there, and if I click once, it has now turned this into some area type. So this is beginning to look kind of like a magazine layout type setup. So quickly else with the type tool, where we can do more powerful things that are harder to do if we were doing something like a keynote or PowerPoint. So I'm just going to use the pencil tool for this. Now very basically we'll click here, we can draw and edit paths. So when you have this selected, it's just like using a physical pencil. If we just click, hold the mouse button down as you're doing it and just drag out like a little wave, something like that. We can then go to type, and I'm clicking and holding here. If you see this little triangle, at the corner of a tool, you can hold, and there are more tools that are related underneath. Again, I said if we go to the menu, we can see all of them here. But just here, I'm going to turn this toolbar off. I'm going to click and hold on the T and go down to type on a path and then release my mouse button. And I'm just going to click on this path, and you can see automatically it's added type on a path. So if I wanted that Same headline, for example. I have that here, and again I have all the same controls to increase the point size, to change the weight, to increase the tracking. Even click on this more options here. I can make it all caps, and obviously with being able to just drag this around and whatnot, it gives me a lot of options, and you can begin to see the power of Illustrator. So let's get into some illustration. Let's rattle through a few more of these tools. We looked at the shape tools, the rectangle, so let's just have a look at some of those here again. So we click on this, and I'm just going to move this artboard over to the side. So we can click, hold the mouse button down and drag and create a rectangle here of any size that we like. You can also hold shift as you drag out, and that will create a regular shape. So in case of the rectangle tool, it's going to create a square. You can actually see up in these properties that the width and the height are exactly the same. You can also double click, and then it will give you the option to input the width and the height of the rectangle. So let's say we wanted one that was 100 pixels wide and 200 high, and click OK, and it will give us that exact dimensions there. Again, if we click and hold, we have the options of these other tools here. The ellipse tool, click and drag. Hold shift as we click and drag. The regular shape is a circle. Similar with all of these. With the polygon tool, as you click and drag, you can press up to increase the number of vertices and down to decrease. So if we go all the way down to 3, we have a triangle. Hold shift and it makes it a regular equilateral triangle. And let go of shift, we can kind of mess around with this and then increase it, and we have these different options here. And so you can play around with this. There's a star tool as well, which again you can do to a triangle or to these different kind of stars just by pressing up and down on the down arrows. Now what we have in Illustrator is the ability to manipulate layers, which makes this again a lot more powerful than basic programs. Whereas we overlay these things. Now they're both black, so let's change the color of this. You can see under appearance we have fill and stroke. So fill means the color and the inside of the shape. So if you click on this once, you've probably got some little options like this, these swatches, or you can click on this color mixer palette to drag these sliders, how much of red, green and blue you want. So I'm just going to drag that up to red, or you can select any of these just so it's a different color. So we can see this red star on top of this black square, and we can just send this further back. So there are you can do this here within the menus, but you can also go to, sorry, it's in the object menu, object, and then arrange, and then you can go center back. But I tend to use these shortcuts, which is why it took me a minute to find it. Shift, command and the left square bracket. So now that is underneath. Now you can do that kind of thing in Word, but what you have here is layers. So if we just click on that panel and then on this little arrow here, it expands it, and you can see all these different things here. So this path, the red star, I can actually click on this circle afterwards to target it. You see that? And we can also click on this layer, hold it and drag, so I could move it back up to the top this way. And these can all be nested in different ways, and it gives us a lot more options of how we layer things on top of one another. A really useful thing to be aware of is this fill and stroke. So fill is the color inside, stroke is the line around the outside. Let's maybe do it with this circle here. So if we change the color of this stroke to say blue, now we can't really see that, it's very small. So if we change the size of this stroke to say 40 point, now we can see this outline around the edge, and it's actually updated here, the fill and stroke. That always appears here at the bottom of the toolbar, so it's easy to get to. You can also double click on these little squares with the color to bring up this color picker menu, where you can if you click next to these different options, this is hue, saturation, brightness, or RGB, it'll bring up these different options here, so you can drag this around and select different colors just by clicking within here. You can also, when this is selected, if we double click again on the full color, use the eyedropper. So you just when we select the object, you can press I, and this allows you to pick a color from somewhere else. So say we wanted to pick this red, we wanted to pick, and it's changed actually the fill and the stroke, it's changed the appearance. Or we can even click on the background and it'll change it to white. I'm just pressing Command Z to undo what we've done here. And with these strokes, you can align these to the center of the path, so you see it's an equal distribution. It's aligned on the center of that path. But if we click here for the inside, it'll move the stroke to the inside of the path, or outside, it will move it to the outside of the path there. We're going to do something useful with this in a minute. I just want some familiarity. So another useful thing with the shape tools as well as these actual tools that are built in here, a quick way often is to use the shaper tool, which you can find if we expand our tools out here, and it looks like a circle with kind of a pencil next to it. The shortcut is Shift N. So if we select that and then click over here, now this automatically creates the shape from a rough sketch. So for example, if we try and draw a rectangle, you see that looks really rough, doesn't it? But if I let go of my mouse button, it's created me a perfect rectangle. Let's try and do a square. Does it know it's a square, or does it try and do a rectangle? No, it thinks that's vaguely square. You can see the dimensions are perfect there, and it figures it out. You can just bring that back in, Shift N, do a circle. That's done that as an ellipse because it was a bit round like that. But if I try and do a circle, there we go. I get a circle. You can do a triangle, whatever shape. So that's a useful tool as well, the shaper tool, to quickly create shapes of the kind of size that you want, and it'll automatically make these into ones with perfect geometry. We can see this in the outline mode. If you press Command Y, you can also do this in your view menu. This is outline mode, so we can see just the paths that are created. I'm going to press Command A, which selects all, and see the blue dots are these anchor points. And you can see how this, what we drew with the shaper tool, very roughly, but it's got just 3 anchor points at each vertice to create a perfect geometric triangle. Okay, let's draw something useful and a bit more exciting. If you're still in outline mode, press Command Y to go back into preview mode, and we're going to use the exercise files now. So go to File, Place, and then navigate to where your exercise file is and import this sketch. Now before you press OK, there is a little option here at the bottom that says Template. I want you to click and select that and then click Place. And what that does is, if we go into our layers property, it's actually placed the template on a new, this imported file on a new layer named template. It's locked it and it's made it slightly opaque, not as contrasted as it normally is, so it's ready there to be sketched over. Now because we've got all this nonsense in here, I'm actually just going to tidy this up. So if we click on this padlock icon to unlock this, we can then move this sketch. So if we just click in the middle of it and drag, and we'll move it out of the way of everything else, then we can lock it again. We've got this layer with all this nonsense on it, so you might want to make a new layer here, but this is fine for our art. Let's maybe just call it art actually, and we use this one. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom into this, and I've drawn some of the tools here, and let's work on this more difficult one, perhaps the pen tool. Now I want to show you masking actually, so I'm going to make another version of this. So I'm just going to unlock it again, and then I'm going to hold down the Option key while clicking and dragging, and what that does, as you can see, is make a copy. Keep Alt and your mouse button pressed down, and then release your mouse button first when you are ready. Now I'm just going to zoom in here, and I'm going to go back with our rectangle tool. I'm going to draw a rectangle around this fountain pen drawing. Then I'm going to go back to my selection tool, click and drag to select both the sketch and this rectangle. Then you can either press Command and 7 or go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make, and it just creates a little crop of this. So you can imagine using that if you had something like a photograph that was part of your layout, and then this is tidied up a little bit. So I'm just going to lock this again and then go back to our art layer and make sure that's selected, because that's where we want to do our drawings. Now if you want to see these layers, you see there's a little eye, toggle visibility, so you can hide that and show whatever's on the top, which we'll do now. So let's try and illustrate this with a few different tools and see what works well. So we're going to start with the pen tool, and here it is. You can click on it or press the shortcut P, and this is probably the most important tool to get to grips with to really understand Illustrator. And I'm going to give you a really quick version of it now, but I'll put a link here and in the description as well to the full length video I did on how to master the pen tool, which is definitely worth getting to grips with. But the basic idea is that with the pen tool, you click on a point. So I'm going to roughly follow this illustration here, and it creates what's called an anchor point. And as I move away, you see this blue line where the next part of our drawing is going to go. So if I click again, it creates a line between these 2 points, and that was a straight line. But now I want to do a curved line. So what I'm going to do is not click once to create a curved line. So I'm just going to undo that. But you would click and hold your mouse button down and drag the mouse to create a curve. Now as you move your mouse around, it will create a curve that moves in different directions. So you want to move it till the path sort of follows where you want it to be. Now this isn't the best sort of method of drawing with a pen tool, so I'm just going to delete this. I'm just pressing backspace to do this. So I want to show you some best practices really quickly, but I do recommend checking out the video. So I'm going to press P, and I'm going to first of all make sure we can see what we're doing. So let's go back to the properties panel. I'm going to have no fill. Now if the fill is selected like it is here, you can just press the slash button and that does it, but you can also click in here and click on this white square with the red line through. And then for the stroke, I want something I can see clearly, so maybe like red, and I'm going to increase this stroke size to 3 point, and depending on how zoomed in you are, you'll just have to you can change that yourself. So we're still on the pen tool, so let's try it again with this. So I'm going to click once and then click once again, and I've got a bit of a thicker red line now, and then I'm going to click and drag. Now to create the neatest and the cleanest geometry, and that's always our goal with an Illustrator, a tip with a pen tool is that you want to get these anchor points going vertically or horizontally. When they're kind of all over the place at weird angles and you just start doing this kind of thing, it just creates a mess. So what we're going to do is we're going to click and drag, and we're going to hold down the shift key so that we have this moving horizontally. And I'm just going to do this roughly. Now this is pointing in the wrong direction here, so what do we do about that? Well, we hold down the option key, and then we have this move tool, and then you see it says the handle on the end. I can now click, hold my mouse button down and move this in the direction that I want it to point, where the direction the path's going to go, and then let go of my mouse button. And now you see the path is moving down in this direction, so I can click and drag again. I'm going to hold shift again to do this, and again here I'm going to hold down the option key, move it over here. My smart guide has made that horizontal for me. Okay, I'll go with that. Click once because I just want a straight line, and then again I'm going to click and drag, hold shift down as I do it. I'm going to hold option, I'm going to move this handle this way. Now this handle isn't technically straight going the other way, so it's not perfect. There's a better way to do it, but I just want to quickly show you what the pen tool kind of does. and sort of the limitations and how we work with it. Press once, see, and it really struggles with this kind of thing, but I'm just going to click and drag just very quickly, just so you can see the kind of thing that is created. So if I just drag this over to the side, you see it's not very attractive, is it, to begin with? So you can improve that with greater precision than the pen tool, but I want to show some other ways of maybe doing it. So we've got that copy there. I'm going to delete this one by showing you some of these other tools. So we have here the curvature tool. Now this is similar to the pen tool, but it automatically creates curved lines with good geometry. It wants to create curves automatically. So if I click here, for example, now you don't just want to click once here because it's not going to understand where you're going. What you need to do is click somewhere where the direction is changing of your line. It's like halfway along there, and then click again, and you see it's automatically creating that curve. So now here, why is it going around like that? Because this is actually a corner where it moves in a completely different direction. So we click once for a curve, twice for a corner. So I'm just going to delete this whole thing, press backspace twice. So let's double click for a corner, click once for a curve, double click for a corner, once for a curve, double click for a corner, double click for a corner, once for a curve. Now we can always edit this, so don't worry about this. Double click for a corner, once for a curve, double click for a corner, double click for a corner, double click for a corner, once for a curve, once for a curve, once for a curve, double click for a corner, double click for a corner, double click, and oh, that was already a corner, so it's changed it to a curve. I'm double click, so I'm just going to click undo, and it has that there. So there's this one here, so if I double click on that, it'll change it, whichever one you want to change it from, a curve to a corner to a curve, or back. Just double click on that point. So this again looks kind of rough, but it's better than what we had before because it's automatically doing these things, and it doesn't allow us to be, it doesn't require us to be expert with the pen tool. I tried to show you like a beginner's version of the pen tool, but check the other version video for some mastery. Okay, so we're improving here, but this still looks like a very sort of hand-drawn kind of style. So what we can do to give ourselves a better chance of success is we can use grids and guidelines to create some uniformity. If we wanted this to look, you could use this kind of style, but if you wanted it to look more like a uniform sort of icon, grids and guides would really help with that. If you have the selection tool selected, under the properties panel, you see some of these options here to show the rulers. So let's click on that. To show the grid, let's click on that. And then here to show guides, or hide them, they're already shown. To lock the guides, smart guides, this kind of thing. So let's make sure rulers are on, grids on, guides are visible, and smart guides are visible as well. You can also do all this in the view panel as well. It's mainly down here under guides, and then show and hide different things. Okay, so this grid here that I've got, let's make sure we're all on the same grid. So if you go to Illustrator, then preferences, then guides and grid, and I've done a grid line every 100 pixels with a subdivision every 10 subdivisions, which means there's 10 pixels for each one of these little squares here. You can change the color of these things, have the grids in the back. Let's turn that off so they're not. Okay, and then we have that here. So what I want to do is create a bit of a grid, create some guidelines that helps me draw this shape in a very uniform way. So I'm going to go back to the layers panel, and I'm going to unlock this layer because everything on that is locked. So now I can select this sketch, and I'm going to just rotate it a little bit so it's a little bit more vertical to help us draw it uniformly. So the rotate tool is here, the shortcut is R. So if you press R and then you change to this crosshair and then just click and drag, and I'm just going to get these lines going vaguely vertical, something like that. It doesn't need to be exact. This is a very rough sketch, and the whole point of this demo is to show you what you can do with a rough sketch. You don't have to have a grid book and take time inking your sketches. You can, do something rough and throw it into Illustrator and do it that way if you like to. So what I'm going to do is create some guidelines now. So if you are hover over the ruler and then click there, holding the mouse button down and then drag out, it will, sorry, I need to be on this layer, sorry, not my template layer but my art layer, and then click and drag, and you can see a little dotted vertical line here, and it will create a line there. You see that guideline? Now I'm just going to undo that one, because what I want to do, go back to properties, is snap these to this grid that I've got here. So here we can put this option, snap to grid is off, snap to grid is on. Okay, so now I'm going to click and drag, and you see I can't go in the middle of these grid lines anymore. It won't let me. It snaps it to the nearest grid line. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. So I'm just going to approximate using this sort of grid. It's a one grid space in the middle here in this fountain pen nib, and then maybe this part of the nib on each side wants to be wider, so I'll do that 2 across, and I'll just make this symmetrical 2. And then the same here from the horizontal, we just click and drag down, and I can create these horizontal grid lines. I want one for where these points, this widest point comes out. I'll do it roughly like that. One here at this extremity, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away from that line. So I'll do the same on the other side. I'm here and I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the edge, so it's roughly right. I need one at the bottom here, and I also need some lines for where this shape sort of starts to move from one direction to the other, the curve on both the top and the bottom. Let's do some for the little shape underneath as well, which we haven't done yet. Let's just do a space of 1, so maybe 3 here. So I'm just dragging this out. Now if I hide the grid, so I just look at these guidelines, that was a shortcut of Command apostrophe, but you can also do it if you have the selection tool via the properties panel. And now we've got this grid which is going to help us draw out using the tools we've got. So let's try with the curvature tool again, but this time, because we've already got snap to grid on, when I click on each of these points, I'm going to actually, I'll start here. I've clicked once, I'm going to double click because that's a corner. I should have done that on the first one, but I can always click on it again to change it. And then I'm going to click here at this point where it begins to diverge. It needs to be a long one, doesn't it? So I'll just take that as a horizontal line and I'll go a long one there, and then I'll click at this corner here. Sorry, that should have been a corner, not a curve. Double click, then click once here, so I'm outside by one there. Double click here, double click, one over, one click, double click, one over, single click, double click, double click, and I'm just going to make a rectangle here, and we'll do that circle in a minute. Double click, double click, double click. Okay, we didn't have our stroke on there, which didn't help us, so I'll colour that in again. There we go. And we've already got something in. Now I'm actually just going to use the shape tool at the bottom to create this, and I'm going to select these 2 paths, holding Alt again, click and drag. Now I'm going to hold Shift down, which means it'll drag it on the horizontal here at a straight line, either straight down or straight across, so I can use these guidelines still. And you can see already, if I just use a shortcut Shift X to swap the fill and stroke, you can also click on this swap fill and stroke arrow here. How much more regular this is than what we had before by using these guidelines, and the curvature tool has been our friend now. And if we press Command Y to see the outlines, really clean geometry, we don't have wonky lines going on. Now I want to create the circle as well, so I'm going to go to the shape tool here, because this is going to be a better way to create a perfect circle. Use the ellipse, and I'm just going to click and drag over this space, make this white, use the eyedropper tool, shortcut I, click on white. I mean, and that's vaguely right. And what I can do, say you had it over here, you can just push the arrows, and because we're snapping to the grid, this is a 3 by 3 grid shape, and you can just drag it around till you think it's where it needs to be. And that basically is the look that we were going for in the first place. Now, to get this working with the geometry, because that looks right, but obviously this is white, so actually this shape hasn't been created properly, and we can illustrate that more if we maybe change the color, double click on the fill, just select anything like a cyan color, click OK. How do we fix this? Well, we can use something called the shape builder tool. Now you might notice I keep dragging these copies out. Now vectors are free, we can create as many of these as we like, and that's good to do so we can see the iterations and we don't make destructive changes, but we can always go back and branch off. Think of like a tree, all these different versions that you make sort of branch off. So with everything selected, holding the Option or Alt key and Shift, Option key, I'm going to click and start dragging, then hold Shift so it's on the same line, and I've got a copy of it here. And then I'm going to use a tool called the Shape Builder tool, which is over here in the menu. You can also use a shortcut Shift M, and what this does is it allows us to combine shapes. It's similar to how the Pathfinder tool works, but it's a much more intuitive way of doing it. So if we, for example here, we can see this rectangle sort of cutting into our circle, but we've got a little plus icon next to our arrow. If I click on this circle and then drag across with this line, it's now built a shape. It's created this one circle, so it's added them together. But if I want to take it away, because I want to take this from the red shape, so this part is cut out like the ink fill, you hold down the Option key and you get the minus sign next to your arrow, and if I click there or drag, you can either click or drag, it's removed that now. So if I press Command Y, you can see with the outlines, it's compared to what we had before, it's now created the perfect geometry on this shape, and that shape builder is really powerful. In fact, we could have actually used it if I just move this path over to the side here, and you can do things by like drawing rectangles to create part of the shape, or like a rectangle here, and then maybe say, right, I want an ellipse to be removed from this shape here to create this curve, that goes into the pen. So if I'm just swap the fill and stroke again, Shift M for shape builder, and sort of delete that out, and you can see I've done this roughly, but how you can build up paths using this tool as we have done here. And then if we wanted this to look more like our pen tool, let's just hold Alt again, click and drag, Shift, and then we can click on the rotate tool, and if you hold Shift as you click the rotate tool, it'll actually do it in 45-degree increments. So we've got something a bit similar to that. We might have one of our other tools like the Add Anchor Point tool. We've got a little plus next to it, so we can again go into the rectangle tool. Let's turn the grid back on and maybe draw a little plus sign kind of thing. There's little things you can do, like you can copy and then you can paste in place, paste in front, paste in place. If we paste in front, it'll place it on top. It looks like nothing's changed. We maybe change the color of this to a darker red, and then if we click R for rotate again, hold Shift, click and drag 45-degree angles, so we have this little sort of plus symbol And we can add these together with our shape builder tool, or again this pathfinder does the same thing, unite. If it's pretty easy to see in outline mode what we have before, and then we unite the shape here. And you could drag this down so it's sort of similar, how it's very close on the add anchor point tool. Maybe if we make both of these black, we'll click on the fill. So you see how from this very rough sketch we've created something here with perfect geometry in not too long. Now Illustrator is super powerful, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I think this is a pretty good start. What I want you to do is go back to these two other sketches here, the one of the pencil tool and the pie graph tool, and try with a few different techniques. Use the pen tool, use the curvature tool, maybe use the pencil tool, use shapes and the shape builder tool, and see if you can replicate these things and create vector illustrations of them with these stroked outlines, with these filled sections, and see how you get on trying to create something just as we did with this add anchor point pen tool illustration. If you've just been watching and not following along in Illustrator, then download the exercise files via a link in the description and have a go. This will help your learning to stick. Subscribe to see more of our videos and check out Flux Academy's programs if you're interested in becoming a professional designer. Until next time, happy designing.